Imagine a time when the people of Israel lived divided, their hearts torn between two kingdoms, the north and the south. The promised land no longer shone as it once did. The people's faith was tainted by strange gods, dangerous alliances, and kings who used their crowns as shields to hide their sins. The throne of Israel in the north was more like an electric chair. Whoever sat on it didn't last long. And that's where he comes in. Pekah, son of Remaliah. Little is known about Pekah's early life. The Bible does not say where he was born or the exact date, but what is known says a lot. He did not come from the royal line. He was an army commander, a man who knew the weight of the sword and the smell of war. He grew up seeing the mistakes of the kings who came before him, men who abandoned God and traded justice for their own interests. And perhaps it was there, in the silence of so many disappointments, that a restlessness was born within him. A desire, or perhaps an obsession, to take control. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting Bible stories and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. If this content touches your heart and you want to support us, feel free to click on the Thanks a Lot button. All help is welcome and makes a big difference. While King Pekah reigned, surrounded by flatterers and increasingly distant from God, Pekah watched. He waited. He planned. He wasn't just another soldier. He was a strategist, a wolf in sheep's clothing. And when he saw the opening, he didn't hesitate. It was an ordinary day. The palace was silent, but it was the kind of silence that screams. Pekah entered with 50 hand-picked men, soldiers from Gilead, men accustomed to blood and blind loyalty. Without fanfare, without warning, the king was killed right there. A sure blow. Quick, cold. With the body still warm on the floor, Pekah took the throne. But what he would do from then on, no one could predict. Because the new king had plans, and his eyes were already set on an alliance that would change everything. Pekah's blood had not yet dried when the palace corridors began to fill with hurried footsteps and whispers laden with fear. The throne was now Pekah's, but he wasted no time with speeches or ceremonies. There was no crown raised to the heavens, no crowd singing hosannas. His reign began with the blade, not with celebration. Pekah was no ordinary man. He carried the strength of a warrior on his shoulders and the weight of someone who had seen the worst of humanity in his eyes. But instead of shying away from it, he seemed to feed off the tension in the air. In a few days, he changed the court, shuffled positions of power, dismissed old advisors, and brought those who spoke the language of war closer to him. All in silence. Every move calculated, like someone playing chess who sees checkmate before the first move. The people, tired of the empty promises of previous kings, looked at him with a mixture of fear and hope. Would the kingdom now regain its strength? Would Israel finally be free from the pressure of its neighbors? But Pekah was not interested in keeping things as they were. He wanted to leave his mark, and to do that he decided to aim high. He knew that the Assyrian Empire was a threat, growing like a giant shadow on the horizon. Instead of bowing down, Pekah decided to resist, but not alone. He began to sew together, behind the scenes, a daring alliance with King Rezim of Syria. It was a risky move, the kind that could raise a kingdom, or drag it into the ground once and for all. It was an agreement made in the dark, far from the eyes of the people and the walls of the temple. And when this secret pact took shape, it brought with it the idea of an attack, an unexpected move that would pit two kings against a single enemy, a dangerous plan targeting his own blood brother, the kingdom of Judah. The decision had already been made. The agreement between Pekah and Rezin was not just a handshake, it was a pact of war. A deal sealed in the dark, where every word weighed like a sword. The two kings, one from Israel, the other from Syria, had a common goal: to force Judah into an alliance against the Assyrian Empire, which was approaching like a storm. But Ahaz, king of Judah, refused. He did not want to get involved. And then, diplomacy turned into a threat. Pekah, now emboldened by Rezim's presence, didn't think twice. If Judah didn't want to play, then they would be forced to play. The armies began to move. The fields were filled with spears, shields, and horses. The sound of war drums echoed through the valleys. It was as if each soldier's footsteps announced, "Fire is coming." The plan was simple and cruel. Invade Judah, depose Ahaz, and put someone who would obey them on the throne. A puppet king, a puppet who would dance to their tune. But this attack was not just military strategy, it was bloody treason. Israel and Judah, despite their divisions, were children of the same God, descendants of the same people. Now they were ready to destroy each other. Pekah, overcome with pride, seemed blind. He thought this quick war would solve everything, that it would be like pulling a rotten tooth, painful, but necessary. Little did he know that he was lighting a fire that he would not be able to extinguish. And worst of all, it was only the beginning. The first attack came with fury. Judah, taken by surprise, barely had time to react. The gates fell, the defenses broke, and then, in a single day, a massacre took over the streets. Screams, swords, dust, bodies. The day began like any other, but the sky seemed heavier. It wasn't rain. It was something worse. It was as if the earth itself was holding its breath. In a few hours, silence turned to screams. Pekah's army advanced on Judah with a fury that even the elders could not remember ever seeing. And it was there, in that scene of dust and despair, that one of the greatest tragedies in the history of God's people took place. 120,000 soldiers from Judah were killed. That's right, 120,000 in a single day. It was not a fair battle. It was a massacre. Experienced men, princes, trusted officers, even King Ahaz's own son, all fell. It was as if Pekah's sword thirsted for vengeance, and no name, no matter how important, was spared. But it didn't stop there. As if the killing weren't enough, the soldiers of Israel took 200,000 people prisoner. Women, children, the elderly, ordinary people, people who were not guilty of anything. They were dragged, chained, humiliated, pushed along dirt roads to the gates of Samaria, the capital of Israel. A line of suffering walking in the hot sun, in silence. It was pain walking barefoot, but just when all seemed lost, something totally unexpected happened. In the middle of the crowd watching the prisoners arrive, a voice rose. It was not a soldier or a general. It was a prophet, someone no one expected, but who appeared with the authority of one who speaks in the name of heaven. His name was Oded. And what he said in front of everyone made the people stop. It made hearts beat faster. It made even the hardest hearts bow their heads. Because sometimes a single voice is enough to change the course of an entire crowd. The people of Samaria were silent. Not the usual silence, but the heavy silence of those who see too much and don't know what to do with it. The prisoners of Judah, hungry, barefoot, wounded, stood before them, treated like trophies of war. Men looked down, mothers clung to their children. Children did not understand why they were being taken so far from home. It was as if their dignity had been stripped from them, along with their clothes and names. It was in this atmosphere that Oded appeared. No one expected anything from him. He was an almost unknown prophet, coming from who knows where, but with a voice that seemed to cut through the air. He stood between the soldiers and the prisoners, and without fear said what no one else dared to say. "Do you think you have done justice?" he shouted. "Do you think God is happy with what you have done? Isn't the Lord's wrath on Judah enough? Now you want to bring it on Israel too? These captives are your brothers, blood of the same blood." The words struck the hearts of the people like a hammer, and the strangest thing was, it worked. Because something stirred inside them. The city leaders, important men, began to look at each other, shaking their heads. Some wept. Others, for the first time, laid down their weapons. And then, in a scene that no one there would ever forget, the prisoners began to be treated with compassion. They clothed the naked, they fed the hungry, they cared for the wounded, and as if by a miracle, they prepared caravans to take them back to Judah with honor. The people who had entered in humiliation left restored. But while this scene brought a little light to such a dark time far away, another scenario was unfolding. The sound of war drums already echoed on the horizon. An empire was on the move, and its eyes were now on the kingdom of Israel. While the people of Israel were still trying to digest everything that had happened with the prisoners of Judah, a shadow grew in the east. It came from afar, but it was approaching fast. The name that echoed across the land in fearful whispers was Tiglath-Pileser III, king of Assyria, a man who made no deals, only imposed fear. Where he passed, he left smoke in the sky and silence in the fields. Pekah knew that Assyria was dangerous, but he bet big when he joined Rezin. He thought he could resist the empire with strength and courage. But Tiglath-Pileser was no ordinary enemy. He came with a strategy, trained soldiers, and a hunger for conquest that would not take no for an answer. And when he heard of the rebellion led by Pekah and Rezin, he did not think twice. He marched with his army like a giant wave, about to swallow everything in its path. The first region to fall was Galilee. The screams came before the spears. Cities were invaded, burned, and depopulated. Then came Naphtali, and then other regions of northern Israel. Families were torn from their homes, tied up like animals, and taken to distant lands. Entire peoples disappeared overnight. Those who tried to fight died. Those who hid were hunted down. The kingdom of Israel began to shrink like a wet cloth in the sun. With every step Assyria took, the ground seemed to disappear beneath their feet. And Pekah, he tried to maintain the appearance of a strong king, but inside he already felt the weight of his mistake. His people were suffering, his cities were falling, and he had nowhere left to run. But the most dangerous threat was still within the palace itself. For while the enemy attacked from outside, eyes within the court began to shine with ambition. And once again, the throne of Israel would be threatened, not by a foreign sword, but by a blow from within. Inside the palace, the mood was different. Pekah still sat on the throne, wore the crown, and gave orders as if he had everything under control. But behind the heavy curtains, the whispers grew louder and louder. The people began to wonder if the king really knew what he was doing. Assyria advanced mercilessly, cities were turning to ashes, and Israel looked more and more like a sinking ship in the open sea. Even so, Pekah did not back down. He did not surrender. He preferred to fall standing than to kneel. But this stubbornness, which was once seen as courage, now sounded like madness. The very officers who once swore allegiance to him began to see the king as a problem, and no longer as a solution. Hoshea, son of Elah, was one of those men, silent, smart, soft-spoken, and calculated in his movements. He observed everything. He watched the fall of the kingdom as one watches a building collapse in slow motion. It was no longer a question of if the kingdom would fall, but when, and he did not intend to be dragged down with it. And so, between discreet meetings, dinners with fewer guards, and quieter nights, another conspiracy was born. A betrayal made in the dark, like that of Pekah years before. The difference? Now it was Pekah who was on the other side of the sword. Hoshea approached cautiously, waiting for the right moment. And when the king least expected it, the blow came. Quick, cold, deadly. The same palace that saw the fall of Pekah here now witnessed the fall of Pekah. No fanfare, no resistance. But while Hoshea took the throne and tried to reorganize the wreckage that remained of Israel, the world did not stop. Assyria was still there, steadfast, hungry, waiting only for the next move. And the new king, as clever as he was about to discover that taking power was only the beginning. Pekah's body was barely cold when Hoshea found himself surrounded by anxious voices. People wanted answers, plans, a direction. The throne was now his, but the weight that came with it was relentless. The kingdom was in ruins. The northern cities looked like ghost towns. The fields were empty, the streets silent. It was as if Israel had lost its color. Hoshea was no fool. He knew he couldn't go head-to-head with Assyria as Pekah had tried to do. The enemy was too big, too cruel, so he made a decision that many would call cowardly, or perhaps wise. He sought out the king of Assyria and bowed down before him. He paid tribute. He promised allegiance. He tried, in his own way, to keep Israel alive, even if wounded. For a while it worked. Hoshea sent silver, offered gifts, did everything to keep the peace. But inside, something bothered him. The feeling that he was being watched, controlled, surrounded. And little by little, that desire to break away from it all returned. To try another way out, to bet big. He began to talk to Egypt. He sent hidden messengers, trying to forge a new alliance. He thought that with Egyptian support, he could get rid of Assyria once and for all. But was no longer on the throne. Now, Shalmaneser Thief was in charge, and he was no less cruel. Hoshea was discovered. The Assyrian king, with no patience for double-crossing, had him arrested. And so it was done. The king of Israel, who thought he could play with giants, ended up chained, humiliated, voiceless. Meanwhile, Assyria was preparing to strike the final blow. It would not be against just one man. It would be against an entire nation. The march began, the armies advanced, and the siege formed around Samaria. The city that once shone as the capital of the northern kingdom, now trembled on the brink of the abyss. Samaria, the city that was once full of life, was now surrounded. The gates were locked. Soldiers stood on the walls, their eyes alert to every enemy movement. Assyria had come with everything it had. It was no longer a distant threat. It was real. It was present. It was overwhelming. Hoshea the king was already out of the fight, imprisoned as a traitor. And the people? All they could do was wait for the worst. The siege lasted 3 long years, 3 years of hunger, fear, and despair. Nothing came in or out. The streets were filled with silence, and with each passing day the despair grew. Food became a luxury, water a currency. Mothers wept for their children. Strong men became shadows. What was once a kingdom was now only resistance. Outside, the Assyrians were calm and confident. They knew victory would come. It was only a matter of time. They didn't need to break down the walls with force. They just had to wait for those inside to break down on their own. And that's what happened. When the gates finally fell, there was no strength left to fight. The city was taken, without glory, without honor. What was left of the people was dragged like cattle to distant lands, scattered among strange nations, mixed with other peoples. It was the end of the northern kingdom. Israel was wiped off the map like a candle extinguished with a breath, not for lack of soldiers, but for having strayed from the God who called them there long ago, when everything was still a promise. The fields were empty, the houses abandoned, the altars destroyed. And those who passed by afterwards found only ruins and stories lost in the wind. But even with all this, the name of Pekah still echoed among the survivors, because in the end, that was where it all began. But the echo of his fall would still reverberate through generations. Time passed, but the name of Pekah was still whispered among those who remained. Not with pride, but with a mixture of sadness and amazement. He had no famous children, no statues erected in his honor. He left no hymns, no inheritance, only memories of a reign that began with violence and ended in destruction. Those who asked about him always heard the same answer. He was the king who opened the doors to the fall of Israel. And it's strange to think about it, because Pekah didn't start out small. He had vision, he had courage, he was hungry to change things. But it was that same hunger that turned into poison. When he decided to take the throne by force, he was already lighting the spark of a fire that even he could not extinguish. the wrong alliances, the pride, the plans made in the dark. All of this became a noose around his own neck. And when Assyria arrived, it was already too late. The reign of Hoshea was just a breath, a desperate attempt to hold on to what was already falling apart. Israel was taken away, scattered throughout the world. Samaria turned to dust. And all this without a single enemy sword being raised at the beginning. The fall began from within, and that is what made it even more painful. Even so, amid the silence left by the ruins, the name of Pekah did not disappear. It remained as a reminder, a scar in the history of the people, as if his life had been written so that in the future, other kings, other generations, could look back and understand what happens when you exchange God's will for your own plans. And so, looking back, what remained of Pekah's story was not a successful reign, nor victories worth celebrating. What remained was a warning, the living memory of a man who had power in his hands, but lost his way because he tried to be greater than his calling. He trusted his own plans more than God's direction. He relied on human alliances and ignored the voice of heaven, and that, in the end, cost him everything. Pekah is the kind of character who screams without saying a word. He shows us what happens when ambition turns to blindness, when the desire to win turns to stubbornness, when pride covers the ears and the heart hardens. He had chances. God still used prophets in his time. He still spoke to the people. He still warned them. But Pekah didn't want to listen. He didn't want to stop. And when he realized it, it was too late. Perhaps the strongest lesson of his life lies there, in knowing when to turn back, to listen, to recognize that being in control is not always the best place to be. There are times when insisting on our own path only takes us further away from our purpose, and when we stray from our purpose, everything falls apart. The story of Pekah also reminds us that a leader's mistake can drag many people down with him. Israel did not fall alone. It was pulled down by the disobedience of a king who thought he could face everything on his own. And how many times today do we do the same? We trade what is right for what seems faster. We ally ourselves with those who suit us, and when everything goes wrong, we ask, why? Perhaps it is because, like Pekah, we forget who should really be on the throne of our hearts. And then history repeats itself. If you like the story of King Pekah and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming adversity, be sure to like this video and share it with your loved ones. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content. Together, we will explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.